Okay. Get it
Hi.
together.
Thank you all for joining me. I have a really special guest, and I'm going to have her introduce herself to you all. Can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Cerita Yvonne. I am an educated and validated relational trauma expert. I am what I consider to be half hood and half holy, a trauma coach and a phenomenal psychotherapist. And I'm excited to have this conversation.
And when we say holy, are we talking about the Christian holy,
No,
HOLY? Or are we talking
no, no,
about,
no,
I just want to
no, no,
clarify for my people.
no. I'm, I'm a fan of the divine within. You know what I'm
Okay.
saying?
I
That's
feel
what
you.
I'm
I'm
a
with
fan
you.
of.
Okay. So we talk about WHOLE.
Yeah.
I love how you affirmed yourself at the beginning. And so one of the things on this podcast, because we're going to talk about trauma, especially when it comes to Black women, like you're very passionate about it. For people that are watching this now, if you go to YouTube, Celeste the Therapist, you will see this beautiful picture in her background. But I also listened to her on another podcast. Shout out to Ursula on Black girls getting their shift together, where you really went in around some of the ways that we're affected, right? Because I think we talk about trauma, but we never really talk about how we're affected and how we can heal. And that's why, like, I created this like platform. But did you always have this kind of affirming, like healing, holistic vibe about you growing up?
I did. Obviously, I didn't know about trauma at that time.
Mhm.
I knew there was something wrong. I
So
knew
you've
that
always
there was,
knew that. You feel like you've been always wise. You seem wise in the way that you move through life.
you know what? I can own that. And I so
Yeah.
appreciate you seeing me
Mhm.
for who I've become. And
Mhm.
so throughout my life, my wisdom showed up as a drive to learn, a drive to, and that was an aspect of my trauma. But I had this drive to understand myself, to understand the world. And my path at that time, because it was what was available to me, was spirituality. Christianity was not my thing, but I wanted to have a relationship with myself because I knew there was a disconnection. I couldn't quite name it, but I could feel it. And so I looked through books and I took classes to try to figure that out. But it wasn't until I learned about trauma that I really understand the source and the meaning of that disconnection that I was feeling.
That's good. And I have people from all different age groups that listen to me, and I just kind of want to share that you didn't grow up in an environment that promoted it completely. That was something you leaned on. Like you worked on your environment within because outside probably felt very chaotic. Is that fair to say?
It was definitely chaotic. I would say, well, and I know this is a podcast for people interested in personal development. If you know about adverse childhood experiences, I'm an 8 out of 10. And so
Can you
while
just say that for people? So 8 out of 10, I mean, she hitting a lot of marks out of, just let them know because some people may not know.
yes, well, that means that I have had significant trauma, capital T and little t traumas. And while, of course, there was experiences of love and education and some affirmation, there was also a lot of chaos, a lot of toxicity, being invalidated. I was sexually abused, emotionally abandoned. I was raised by a single parent. My father was in jail for murder most of my childhood. And so, one thing I can say absolutely about my mother is despite her major capital T traumas, she kind of put me on the path. She didn't know what exactly the path was, but she said she always felt that the answer was in a book. So she read a lot. She gave me The Psychological Chains of Slavery when I was in high school. So I was reading books, all kinds of books, Langston Hughes, Nikki Giovanni. And so it gave me encouragement to keep going. And didn't stop until I finally learned about trauma. Learning about God was, it was cool, but it was like a temporary bandage for me because it still gave me license to spiritually bypass all of the emotions, all of the feelings, all the ways I felt worthless by doing things like affirmations.
That's good. And for people listening, I just want you, because when you and I grew up, it wasn't really the internet, or we didn't
I'm
have
young. I'm just
information.
playing. She right. We ain't had no internet.
we we didn't have information. I can't stand you. We didn't have information at our fingertips. And listening to your story, I related so much to you because I think for me, I thought knowledge was power. I didn't know how I was going to make it out of my space, but I knew there was more for me. I didn't know what that more was. I just knew there was more for me. And I can't identify like one person or something that changed my path. Like some people may have that. Oh, this one auntie or this person like really helped me. I couldn't identify that, but I do know within that I knew there was something more for me. So people that are listening to this, like I really want to encourage you to look at what you have, right? And because now that we have information at our fingertips, I really want you to work on like getting yourself the knowledge that you need to get to where you're trying to go. Because it wasn't a one time, one size fits all. Contrary to popular belief, this is a whole like journey that we're on, and we're still on it, right?
Absolutely. And can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, of course.
that was so empowering. And I want to also remind your listeners that although we have, or you, I know I have experienced trauma, there are parts of me that have experienced pain, but not the whole entirety of me or you. And so it's interesting because a lot of people will say, well, there it was like there's something, this drive that comes from within. And I think when we feel like we're not whole, there's something that moves us toward healing. And whatever that label is for you, it doesn't matter, but it's about you recognizing that you do have the tools and you do have the power. And if you're willing, see, because a lot of us are taught to seek externally, but if you're willing to follow some of the directions that you have within you, the path will be just, it will be easier. I'm not saying it will be easy, but you will amaze yourself about what you already know and who you already are.
Thank you for that part about there are parts of us that experience trauma, because and the reason why you may feel like no Sarita, no Celeste, I'm full of trauma, it's because when we don't reconcile and when we don't work on healing, it will direct our path. It will be the lens in which we see life under. So if you don't resonate with what she just said, it's maybe because of the reconciliation piece that hasn't happened. That may take time. But I appreciate that mindset shifting that you just gave for me and my audience. I really love that. I'm gonna be using that, girl. I'm gonna say Sarita told me. Oh, don't worry. I'm gonna let people know that you told me. Um, so I wanted to give a little snippet of Sarita's life so that as she's sharing about this generational trauma, I want you to know that she understands. And it's not that people who've never been through anything can't deliver messages, but I think for me personally, it's always resonated more when I'm like, oh my gosh, they get it. They have my story. Even sometimes when I was in the middle of my traumatic things that were happening, I would see it on Lifetime and see it on TV, and I would be like, no, oh my gosh, like I would relate so heavily, but still didn't know how to like get to where I needed to go. So
Yeah.
I know like when storytelling can be powerful because people are being seen, and I love the fact that you're able to do that for people. So Sarita ends up landing into the field of mental health, which what was that like for you? Because I grew up in church, and mental health was not something that we talked about, nor did I understand. So what was that like for you going to that path?
Well, honestly, I'm going to censor myself a little bit in my language because
Oh no, it's okay. Do what you got to do. I just got to put an
oh,
E when
good,
I
good,
edit it.
good.
I'll put an
It
E.
was a long fucking journey. It was not an easy path. Let me tell you, because I was chasing, it was like there were parts of me in times in my life when I was chasing my soul, But there were a whole lot of times when I was chasing self-worth. So my path was long and roundabout. I had an interest, but I also had an interest in feeling and looking for external validation. So I have a degree in commercial construction project management. I was in real estate. I had a real estate license. I thought I wanted to build affordable housing. But meanwhile, after this, I would be like doing meditation. I helped build a house for the Habitat for Humanity, all women
I didn't
build.
hear all this. This is the first time hearing this thing. You was
Well,
really
I
out
mean, I
heavy. You was heavy in these streets. You said, "Hey, my insides might not be right, but I'm gonna make that money, honey."
girl, I'm gonna make this money and I'm gonna help people. Cause those of us who be broken inside, instead of dealing with our stuff, we like, I want to help people. I want to coach people. Can I pray with you? No, pray for yourself, baby. And so I was doing all the things out here in these streets, looking tad bit ridiculous, sometimes fly. And meanwhile, taking an intuitive development class. Like, I'm not even joking, honey. I'm not even joking. I even did a sweat lodge so I could sweat out the
What
toxicity
do
in
you
my
think?
spirit.
Sarita, what do you think it is? Because this is a common thing that happens. And I think I always tell people when we look outside of us for that healing, we're waiting for something or somebody else to do the work that happens inside. Why do you think people lean, or you specifically, why did you think you were chasing and leaning towards external things? Because this is a real thing that happens for
It is a
people.
real thing. I think, and see, this is why trauma is so insidious because I didn't have full connection to my own voice, to my own intuition, to my self knowing. I knew I wanted more, but I didn't really know exactly what that was. So the world tells you, people tell you, TV tell you that, well, maybe if you get more things, maybe if you make more money, when you grow up in the hood, that's what it's all about. Like, no one cares about your mental health. They care about, like, do you have Jordans? Because that's going to make you worthy and valid. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is the people around me. Like, I didn't know who I was, but I didn't know that I didn't know who I was. So I looked around me. Well, what are they doing? What?
And for people listening, you were doing it better financially, or you was in a different like space than you were growing up, as far as like you had a place to, you had like things, you had all of these things. And whether we're talking about growing up in a hood or just being like, we got the hood, the culture aspect of it, you know, growing up in the system, but then we got the
Mhm.
American culture, because we
Yes,
got Amazon shops everywhere. So you're like, have all of these things around you that are telling you this is how you can be okay. So
exactly.
unlearning
Exactly.
that has to be a complete shit show. Like, it's hard to like step out of that, because that's very dysfunctional. And when you're in a dysfunctional space, that's the norm. And as you're
Yes.
trying to get into a functional space, that feels really hard too. What was that like for you to step out of that?
I think it can be hard, but you know what's harder is dealing with the pain of being inauthentic, of having inconsistency, of having struggles and failures when you're trying to work towards shit that don't even really matter to your spirit. You know what I'm saying? Or your value system. So for me, I got to a point where I knew that something had to give. And I felt unfulfilled. That's why, like, after I was chasing money, I was trying to help people because I thought that was going to help me feel better. And so it really took for me to sit down and to make a very clear decision, because I knew that it's like I'm chasing something, but I'm not getting the benefit of feeling emotional relief. It's not working. And the times where I told myself it was working, it was a lie. It was because other people said, it's working for you. What do you mean? You're doing good. You're doing great. And whatever it was. And I'll tell you, no matter how much money or status or labels you get, your trauma will show up in your relationships because your relationships mirror your trauma. So even though there's times in my life, because I don't want to paint this picture like Sarita was just balling out and everything was just fine. No, it was not. There was highs and lows. There was great times and bad times. There was despair. There was loss. Like, and really, I think a lot of that had to do with my trauma because it it was I was comfortable striving, but not with actually achieving. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It's like a rat race. And speaking of how it shows up relationally, one of the things you shared in the podcast I heard you on is this idea of repetition compulsion. Can you
Yeah.
explain to people what that means? Because I went and googled it. I'm like, wow, like so many people are doing that. One thing about you, one thing about y'all know me because you know I'm a it takes me a while to take in information. Like people think like, oh my God, you're so smart. I'm not that smart, but I'm very consistent and diligent. But Sarita, I could tell you just be taking in stuff because you like you learn the way you learn is like a sponge. Like it's when information. You love
Yeah,
research. It's I can hear it all
I
in
do.
you.
I do love research, but Imma say I think this has been learning about trauma has been one of the hardest and easiest things for me because I love it. And
Yeah,
so taking it in is a joy. I'm sitting in class, we're talking about the hardest things, and I'm like, my
I can
teachers
tell.
as a therapist, they always come and compliment me on a break. And so I think that's part of finding yourself.
Yeah.
That passion just shows up and it shows up differently for everybody, which is
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, for me, what was your question?
Repetition.
Oh,
Sorry, because
so
I was like, I was admiring the way you were just regurgitating information, because like you said, research has been done, but not on us. But you're able to use some of that. Okay, go ahead, girl.
girl,
Tell the
don't
people.
get
Tell the people.
yes. That is yes. Okay, so with trauma, and again, this is just yet another reason why it's so insidious, is that it not only changes or impacts your identity, it changes what you are attracted to because human beings love in a way that is familiar. And so if we grow up in an environment that is toxic, where our nervous system is constantly activated, where there's a lot of stress, there's arguing, there's this energy always where you're always on guard. You never know if somebody gonna get angry or is somebody drunk. You what is normal for you is that level of excitement energetically in your nervous system and how you communicate and how you interact. And so the aspects of this trauma of what you've learned, it becomes a part of how you see the world and what you think is normal for you. And so this is why people get into relationships that hurt them. And you'll find where a woman who was in an abusive relationship, she'll find another partner. And it's like, out of all the other people, you found another person to abuse you. It's repetition compulsion or the compulsion to repeat. And the trauma research shows that for women, and we are more likely, not always, but if you've experienced trauma, you are likely to repeat the trauma by attracting situations and people that mirror the original trauma. And this leads into generational trauma because it also leads into them getting themselves into experiences where their children are also traumatized. And the idea trauma researchers say why this happens or why we do it is that we are always driving ourselves, whether it's dysfunctionally or not, towards wholeness and mastery, self-mastery. So their conclusion that they've come to is that we do this as a what they call it a hope for redemption, to finally get it right, to finally win the love of someone who hurt you, who denied you, who invalidated you. But we know that it doesn't work like that because the people that you're choosing, if you're choosing familiar, traumatic people, they do not have the capacity to heal your wounds, meet your needs, and love you in the way that you've never been loved before. It
Hmm,
doesn't
that's
work.
really good. And since we're on Black women, because I happen to be a Black woman, and I really,
Are you?
yeah, I love Black women. But I had it, I didn't always receive the love back, which has been hard. But I think working in
Well, I
this
love
field
you.
with, oh, thank you. Well, you are doing a love you challenge. We're gonna find out about that. That wasn't planned. That just happened to happen that way. um, I think that when I've worked with Black women and I'm able to like get through some of that trauma, I see a beautiful person there. And one of the things I want to kind of tackle is how, um, the trauma shows up in the way that we deliver, right? The way that we're always on, the way that we don't allow pleasure in our life, the way that we allow um, discomfort. So like this is something that you love like sharing about, and I love how you break things down. So I would love for you to just share where you are with this in regards to what you've learned, because you've learned a lot, and walk my audience through that.
Specifically related to Black women?
Black women. But before you do that, can you just give a definition, a working definition of generational trauma? For people that are listening, there is an episode
Oh,
333 where I had Linton Heston on, who talked about it. And he's a Black male, so we did talk a lot about Black males, and we talked about Black people in general. But I do want to spend some time around Black women. But let's just kind of help people understand, what does generational trauma even mean?
okay. So it is a big term. And I'll give you really what my understanding has become, because it is the idea that we have inherited ways of thinking, being, and doing that we pass down from generation to generation. And I think a lot of it's for Black people specifically, because this is a human experience that we're talking about. But we know that our experiences are different and much more complex. And so, what I want to shed light on is, I think with generational trauma, the challenge of, I think the core of what we are passing down is this identity of being defective. And let me explain that, if I may. We know from decades of trauma research done mostly on white people that one of the common symptoms of trauma is toxic shame. And toxic shame is different from regular shame, because it is the identity that who you are as a person is defective. Not I've done a bad thing, it's I am bad. And when you've had generations of people, our ancestors, that have had to appear as perfect, as less than human, as putting on the cape and the mask and being unemotional and surviving, all of these things are they all of these things can help you to survive. It requires inauthenticity. You can never express how you feel, what you really think, the wrongs that have happened, the injustices, the things that you're interested in, the being loud and out in the world and being free. We haven't been able to really be that. I think now we are owning that and demanding it. But as it relates to generational trauma, we've had to live in a box.
Yeah.
Is this making sense?
It's making
And
sense.
living
Go ahead. Living in a box feels like
I
what?
just want to add one more thing. And living in this box, the message that we receive internally is that who you are is bad.
Yeah, that's good. And I just, for my audience, so I've been podcasting since 2018, but over the last year, I've at first it was just like mental health, but I've been so drawn to really helping Black people, because when I found out only 3% of the therapists are Black, and I just said, my God. And we tell people to go to therapy, but we don't have enough people that look like us. And I think, everything you said just resonates so deeply around um, the way that they were taught as slaves, and the way it carried into our households, seen and not heard. And a lot of, I'm in a different space mentally that I have been, and I was afraid to have kids, because I remember what I
Me
felt like
too.
growing up. I was like, I don't want anybody to ever feel like this, because I didn't have words for it. And one of the things I do with people, whether you're a parent that's listening to this, or some who have like recognized some things that have happened with you and your child, or a child who's struggling with your parent, I look at the whole picture, not to excuse behavior, but so that people aren't resenting and holding on to so much baggage. Because when you think about how that has been passed on without any knowledge or education, you can understand why things have happened. It doesn't make it right, but I think understanding why can really help people heal and because we can't take back anything that's happened. I can't take it back. And so, like, do I want to keep ruminating on it, or do I want to reconcile with it so it's not controlling me? That's really good.
Absolutely. And the thing is, I think that what trauma research has given us is that we have to understand what happened to us in order for us to heal, because otherwise you're just making up shit. So you really do have to understand your story. And I think that's difficult for some people because we've been told for so long to get over it. Oh, you're just focusing too much on it. But we know from trauma research, like the challenges that one might have with the ruminating or feeling defective or having these core beliefs that they are, they need to be perfect or they need to be something other than who they are. That's a symptom of trauma. It's not a symptom of the actual individual being bad or broken. We're just trying to survive. And Ursula told me the one thing that you told her that really struck her is you said that you have to move from surviving to thriving. And when you can own your story won't own you. And that's the whole point, is that you are not being defined by what happened to you because you're so much more.
Yes, your lens on your life will always, you will always feel like a victim. Always, some people say, why do I always keep going back to this person, or why? And it's because you don't feel like you have control, but it's hard to feel like you have control when you've never had control. And I tell people that the mind does not have concept of time, right? It doesn't know Celeste is 39 and in control, right? When something happens and my body will feel that same feeling when I was 9,
Yes.
then I forget the choices I can make right now in this moment. And
Yeah.
I won't ever be able to move forward if I'm not working on like reconciling and letting my mind know, like, it's okay. Thank you for trying to protect me, right? Because it goes into this flight or fight response and it's trying to protect me. And I can tell my mind, like, I don't, it's okay. I'm gonna be okay. But if I don't do that, I'm cussing out my husband, I'm cussing out my kids, like I'm doing the absolute most for what? Because of what happened in the past. So am I gonna pass that on? And so I say that not to shame people or have people feel guilty, because I've gone through so much and I've responded from my trauma for so long, which is why I'm really passionate about sharing my story and sharing other stories and helping people learn how to work on healing and why healing is important.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that because we know from trauma research, I have to say that because we have so many people on the internet who just give advice. And so we know from trauma research that the body keeps the score. That's a famous book by Bessel van der Kolk, who has really helped to bring complex trauma, which is what we're talking about, to the fore. And your body does respond in real time because what's happening, and this is what I think when people throw the word trigger around, they don't recognize that being triggered means that first of all, I'm holding the ammo. And secondly, I'm being triggered to an experience, an emotional experience that is already in me, and you're just bringing it into the surface in present time. It's been with me. I've been carrying it in my baggage. And when you try to, say the wrong thing, and when you look at me the wrong way, we opening up a packet, a piece of that, a pocket, and out flies this same reaction from when I was actually hurt. And that means that the adult is not really in control. The adult in you, she ain't driving the bus. You letting the 5-year-old take the wheel and wonder why you keep crashing into shit. And then try to come in and put the pieces together and pay restitution and get some construction work. No. You, as the empowered adult with your wisdom and resources and experience, must come to your own rescue.
Yeah.
No one else can do it for you.
No. Can you? So I don't want to mess up this word. I think I wrote it down right. Polyvagal. Did I say that right?
Oh, yes.
Did I say that right?
Polyvagal theory. Yes,
Polyvagal.
you
So
did.
just so y'all know, I'm regurgitating her stuff. She's really good. But like she said, people are throwing around a lot of things, but she's a research guru. Like she loves it.
I
Um,
love the love.
yeah, you're welcome. It's true. Um, but polyvagal, because you that's something you're talking about now with the nervous system, just so people can have context behind what's happening with them.
Well, the easiest way I can explain polyvagal theory is it's the science of safety. Now, you tell me, do we as Black people have a deep experience with feeling safe?
Not in.
And I actually took the class with the creator of the theory. He is awesome. So I do encourage anyone who wants to get on the Googles. And it was so interesting because he has done a lot of work on how our nervous systems regulate one another, how we co-regulate, which is why we need to have more interactions and not just the internet, but how even as a child, a crying baby, just putting the baby on your chest, closeness is there, but you're also regulating them based on your own regulation. And I do think that this is an aspect of generational trauma. I asked him, the creator of this theory, about what this means for Black people. And he took off his glasses and he said, it's a good question. And the answer is we don't know. Because this is his words, because it's so much. You have historical trauma, generational trauma, racism. He said, I don't know. Send me an email. That's what he
At
told
least
me.
he was honest. I like that. I like an honest person like that.
Yes, because
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he knows. And it was so fascinating because in his work, he does all kinds of stuff. He showed faces, regular faces, and asked us to look at our own regulation and if we thought this person was angry or sad. And when he showed Black faces, it was very interesting. There was probably about 200 people in this class and maybe 5 or 6 Black people. And the white people called they were, and I don't think they were being racist, but the faces that they saw, when they saw anger, they saw frustration. And there was like other therapists behind me. I'm like, he looked regular to me. And we all agreed. We got in a huddle and we had a discussion about it, and we all agreed. The one thing I can say I can recognize is that after I asked that question, so many white therapists came up to me
Wow.
asking about it, asking me my thoughts on how they could better work with their Black clients, saying that they know their Black clients are struggling and they haven't found the right therapy to really work with them. And
Mhm.
then one woman said, "Yeah, see, because Black women, they don't really want to deal with a whole lot of bullshit." I said, "You're right." And so, yes, it's the science of safety, and that's part of our generational trauma. Is we
Mhm.
don't for many of us, it's been a luxury
Mhm.
to feel safe, but it's necessary.
It's so necessary. And speaking of Black women, I would love for you to share with Black women, like, and it's like you said, it's not all right. I always like to preface that, and because I don't want nobody writing me and saying like I'm not like that. I'm not saying everybody, but from research and just from like what I've seen, I know we struggle with pleasure. I know we struggle with rest, right? Like I had to build
Yeah.
rest into my system. And, when I do rest, I have to fight the thought. I was just telling a friend the other day, I had a really nice nap, but I had planned on doing some things around the house that I didn't do. And instead of like feeling joy for resting, I was like, dang, I should have did that. And I was like, no, 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 Celeste. Like I have to have this dialogue in my head because we're so used to being on. So can you share with people like how like that trauma like passes on to the ways that we do life as Black women?
Okay, let me see how I can package this into like a couple of minutes because the shit is real, okay? It honestly it goes back to what I talked about earlier about unworthiness, because the thing that we struggle to admit and acknowledge is that underneath unworthiness is shame. Shame. So shame will have your ass working hard overtime to prove that you are worthy. And what's interesting for Black women is that we're women. And I know my mama told me when I was very young, you're Black and a woman, you got two strikes against you, you got to be twice as better. And so when we are dealing with the ideas of that are out here floating around our culture about Black people being lazy, and Black people, not being smart, being subhuman, we are coming in and trained by the people before us about all the shit that you're gonna have to deal with. And in dealing with this, you need to be prepared to work. You need to be prepared to do, and you definitely need to be prepared to be numb. So, research, there was a great researcher who she was a nurse practitioner. She did some research around the Black Superwoman syndrome and found that because a bunch of Black women were like coming into the hospital, like falling out, stress, cancer, what's wrong? And they couldn't figure it out. So, they started looking at their beliefs. The Black Superwoman syndrome, let me see if I can name them all. The first one, uh, invulnerability. Oh, excuse me, a resistance to vulnerability and dependence, a obligation to appear strong, uh, obligation to help others. Was you about to say something, Celeste?
I'm just counting about how many of these that because me crying was a bad thing because if I wasn't bleeding, I shouldn't have been crying, right? So
That becomes a part of how we see ourselves
yeah.
because we have been shamed for having normal human emotions and responses.
And the
Go
shame, just so we're not holding any kind of grudges in our caregivers, that shame stemmed from us having to be inauthentic and not feeling, as Sarita talked about earlier.
Yes. Yeah, and needing to survive a harsh world who doesn't care about your feelings,
Hmm.
right? And so we have obligation. Oh, an obligation to succeed despite limited resources. Get it, girl. You got to get it. Okay. So I said obligation to help others, obligation to suppress emotions. Um, what other one did I say? Come on, let's
Suppressing
just
emotion. I know. I was just counting because I'm like, dang, I was hitting all the notes, and I've been
yes,
delivered.
you
I've
were.
been delivered,
You
but
you so
I've
sweet.
been so delivered. I ain't playing with people no more. Um,
Yeah. So wait, let me make sure. Obligation to suppress emotions, invulnerability, the need to help others, the need to succeed despite limited resources, and it's here, it's here, it's here. It's going to come. Hold on. While I'm waiting for that to come to the surface, I want to say that this Black Superwoman syndrome has so many of us not just being inauthentic, but also we are completely disconnected from ourselves. Because how, if one is expected to be numb, to be invulnerable, not be dependent, right? Which means that I can't trust anyone, I'm afraid, I can't be vulnerable, and I can't be weak. How am I going to show up with you? With my friends, with my family? You think I'm gonna let you know when my heart is broken? Like you got to pass three background checks, two tests, go on 5 interviews in order for me to let you know the ways that I'm actually broken inside. And that creates so much for see, the problem with that is trauma research shows, and I haven't forgot about that last one yet, but trauma research shows that the quality of our relationships and connection is what helps to lessen the symptoms of trauma. So if I don't have if you if I don't let anyone see me, if I can't get close, if I always got a funky attitude because I'm protecting myself because I've been hurt, if I feel like I have to prove everything, then I'm going to be listening and hearing from a defensive place. Not because I'm bad, but because I've been hurt and I don't want to be hurt again. Does that make sense?
yeah, that's why when I said when I meet with these women, I see like there's so much in them that has been blocked by the pain, and it's been
Mhm,
a protection thing.
mhm.
Um, does that make sense?
It does. So when you say blocked in them, what are you saying?
So when I uncover all of this trauma, all of this pain, I'm like, oh my gosh, like look at that. They have a big heart. They're actually not always angry. They're not always this, right? And then when they see themselves, there's so much joy in being able to see themselves and not feeling like everybody's doing everything to them. Like they really start to feel like
Yes.
they're able to control the narrative.
It's interesting because you said, I see what a good person they are, but in reality, you're seeing the real them.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't, and no matter how, when the real person shows up, it's like we can't help but to love that. That's why people are attracted to authenticity.
Hmm.
We're attracted to people who are just real, who can
Hmm.
laugh at themselves, who aren't hiding.
Hmm.
Because underneath all the shit, the 14 masks and 13 capes, all of us are absolutely fantastic. It's not to say
Hmm.
we're not fantastic with it, but it makes you so much more attractive because it's easy for people to connect with you.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's why healing is so important.
I know I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but now that you're saying that, I just because I want to talk about the Love You Challenge, but
Okay.
when I think about the way that we learn how to show up as Black women, I also want you to I just want you to touch on like I feel like a lot of times we feel unloved or incomplete because we don't have a partner. And I think about like trying to show up in a relationship the way that we are, it's not going to be healthy. Why do you
If
think
we
people link like it's like as a superwoman and trying to do everything, but it's like, but I need a man or whatever. I need a partner. I need to be with somebody.
Girl, I remember the last one is obligation to manifest strength. I don't know how I forgot that one.
Dang, that was good.
I
Obligation
could
to
not
manifest
believe.
strength.
Yes, because that okay. So when you have this identity that we've all bought into, and people around you will encourage you to own that identity. A couple of things you mentioned relationships. The first one is I want to say is that some of us seek out relationships to heal our wounds and end up becoming wounded because we don't know how to pick them because we're picking based on our trauma. Okay? So for some of us it's just a distraction and the shit don't work. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I've tried
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Never was successful.
You've been
Um
delivered?
girl, I had to stop hurting myself by
Yeah.
using a random penis. Like
Yeah.
it's not gonna work, sis.
No, but nobody told you that. Nobody said that to us. Like, how are we supposed to know? We're just trying to make it fake it till we make it.
Girl, like I'm just trying to feel good. but but seriously, you made me forget the relationships. And so there's a couple of things I want to say without me going on because I know you got to wrap up. Is that attachment styles, baby?
Mhm.
So based on all the trauma we've talked about, many of us have attachment styles that are not secure, which means we don't have emotional maturity. We grown as hell in age, but emotionally we're like between 8 and 12. And so when you when you don't know how to form secure bonds, meaning your communication, your perception, your emotional maturity, the way you deal with conflict, how you deal with stress, relationships are all these things. It's great in the beginning when you just get bonded, but when shit get real, that's when shit come up. And so a lot of us aren't equipped because we haven't seen healthy relationships. We weren't brought up in healthy relationships. We don't know what it takes to have a healthy relationship unless we learn it ourselves. And so all of this, it can create even more trauma because people will find themselves in the conversation based on their own past trauma. Something must be wrong with me. I must be broken. I must be bad. I must not be worthy. All of these are lies, my sisters and friends, and males alike. These are that conversation is just a regurgitation of the past. Now, what I would say is that when you understand attachment styles, and we could probably do a whole show just on that alone because I love it. I love talking about attachment styles because it shows up in every area of our life, and it shows up in our most intimate relationships because that's when the real you, your fears. How can you have a relationship if you're afraid to really be seen? That means the only people you're going to be attracted to is people who don't require you to take off the mask. Some of us get into relationships and really we're just kind of like hanging out being fake. No one is
without
being real.
without knowing it too. I don't, you feel it,
Oh,
but not know that's what's
I
happening.
absolutely thank you for adding that. I think we don't know. And that's because we have to be willing. Because listen, let me tell you something about relationships. Relationships are mirrors. You're getting invitations every day, all day long when you're in a relationships to look at you because who you are inside, not just, if you want to think positive, but who you are, your beliefs, your fears, your doubts, your insecurities, all of that is going to show up in your relationships
Mhm, mhm,
as a human, not
mhm,
just a woman or man or black person, as a human being.
mhm,
So there's opportunities to look at what's showing up, but what we typically do is make the other person wrong, make the other
mhm,
person bad, or come up with situations when, as you talked about, we have to confront what is there and be willing to look beneath the surface so that we can heal it, so that we can have better connection, deeper connection.
mhm. I love this. This is really good. And I think for people listening to this, you got like a snippet of some of the things and some education around like the why and what's going on inside of you. What kind of like hope or what kind of thing you can share with somebody that may feel like what you're saying is resonating for them, and kind of like what direction should they go into um, as a next step? We know therapy is one, but if therapy is not an option.
Yes, and we have to be real because it's not for everyone. In
Mhm.
terms of maybe access or interests, I highly recommend therapy. Okay, let me say that.
I know.
But there are options, and of course, I provide one. um, I am currently doing what's called a Love You challenge. We are 2 days in, but you can still watch the replays. I am teaching about identifying the hidden blocks to your superpower of self love. So I'm breaking down how to identify and understand like your traumas. I break down what is your ACE score that we talked about earlier, and really understanding how to take away the power that your story has into it, the power that you give your story to control you. We talked about today discovering the root of unworthiness, and I broke down shame, including the 10 rules that every dysfunctional family has that create shame. There's
Wow.
rules to this trauma shit. We
Wow.
do very specific things, we think in specific ways that keep the trauma alive within us, which is why we have to do the inner work. I'm talking about how to love yourself. Of course, it's called the Love You Challenge, and how to discern the crazy makers who trigger you. Because again,
Mhm,
there's rules. There are very specific people out
mhm,
here who are very toxic, who have been
mhm,
doing the same thing in the same way. And so have you. When you ignore red flags, when you pretend that things aren't what they are, and you deny your wounds. So we are getting to the root, honey, with love.
yeah.
No
Wow.
shame, no judgment. But it's about education, and it's a free challenge. It's a free challenge. So yes, I'm excited about it. And for women who are ready to do the work right now, I have a program called Love University, but I know everyone might not be ready to go into the deep. They might want to get in the
Mhm,
shallow and test
mhm.
it out. So the challenge is a great place to start, and you can join by clicking on the link, or joining loveyouchallenge.com.
Wow, that's crazy. Everything like what we talked about is literally what your challenge is
I
gonna help people.
know.
I had no idea, guys, that this was the challenge. I just know she was gonna tell me about it at the end. I'm like, I'm gonna learn with my audience. But so
I
I
know.
just feel like it's so divine the way it, um I I love talking about what's happening and I love educating people, but I always want to like give them a resource or things to think about what they can do next, because it's hard. I luckily for me, like I've been mindful of my journey, so I don't feel like I've arrived, or I know what it was like, so I'm mindful of the way I speak about things
Yes.
and the way I present things, because I know when I would see things just like, just do this and just do that, but nobody talked about like the pain that went along with it. They just said, yeah,
Yeah.
like especially growing up in church. So I just like appreciate your delivery and your passion for working with our people, because it's needed, and you're definitely gonna help somebody like move the needle forward a little bit.
That is so wonderful. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you allow me to be a part of your journey. And I can see one thing about you that I appreciate is that you bring so much love and compassion to a
Thanks.
subject that can be very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think you are wonderful for creating a safe space for people to
Thank
be
you.
honest. And that's what really this is from my perspective as we wrap up, healing is really about reclaiming your innocence.
Yeah.
It's like you're not bad or broken. It's about shifting your perspective of who you are and what your power is. That's
Yeah.
healing. So I thank you so much for this conversation.
Good. I wasn't hard on you, because now, like you mentioned that you're passionate about attachment. So, would you come back on to talk about that? I just want to make sure, like, if you say it in
No,
front of the people.
no. I'm kidding. Yes. I would love it. I would love it. Yes.
Okay,
Thank
yeah.
you.
This was really good. This was really good. And it's so funny, really quick, how when I'll be talking to clients about something, and then they may not get it, but I always tell people, like when I supervise clinicians, regardless if they get it, you're planting a seed. But then they may read a book or hear something. I'm like, oh my gosh, I get it, right? And so, like, you and I, we speak the same language, but in different ways. And so, like, that's why I love hearing you, because it's like I'm the type of person, I'm reading books, like I just have like not I'm not like a researcher like you, but I'll be reading these self-help books because I tell people I got to give myself medicine. This is what I need to help myself. And so I'll read something. It's like I know it, but I'm like, yes, that's so good. And I'll be looking at, I don't got nobody to share with, but I'm like, yeah, that's good. And
Text me.
so
Call me.
it'd be like so good, but you hear it in a different way. And so when I hear you
Yes.
speak, it's like things that I know, but the way you say it is kind of dope. And so I would just encourage people to continue to not just let this be the last time you allow yourself to hear something, especially if it's resonating for you. Really like dig deeper. It's important. So thank you.
It is. It is. Thank
Oh, so
you.
loveyouchallenge.com, and you can find that in the show notes. But if people wanted to reach you, your website is what?
CeritaYvonne.com.
Okay. And then you can find all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being an amazing guest.
Thank you for having me. I love you so much.
Oh, thank you.